December 4th, 1956. The Grand Ole Opry, backstage dressing room number 3. 18 musicians crammed into a space designed for 6. The air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of old wood. Johnny Cash leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Elvis Presley tune a borrowed guitar. When Elvis announced what song he wanted to play, Johnny's eyebrows went up and he shook his head slowly. "That's a mistake," he said, not unkindly but firm. "That song'll eat you alive if you don't know what you're doing." Everyone in that room went quiet. What Elvis did next didn't just prove Johnny wrong. It made the man in black sit down on the floor and listen like a student. The silence that followed Johnny's words wasn't hostile. It was the silence of people waiting to see what would happen next. Waiting to see if this rock and roll kid from Memphis, this phenomenon who made teenage girls scream and parents nervous, really understood the music he was about to attempt. Carl Perkins, sitting on an overturned crate near the door, stopped rolling his cigarette. Mother Maybelle Carter, the matriarch of country music who'd been playing the Opry since 1927, put down the coffee cup she'd been holding and turned her full attention to Elvis. When Mother Maybelle paid attention, everyone paid attention. Elvis didn't get defensive, didn't argue, didn't try to convince anyone he could do it. He just finished tuning the guitar, adjusted the strap over his shoulder, and looked at Johnny with a slight smile. "Well," he said quietly, "let's find out." His hands weren't shaking. His voice was calm. But there was something in his eyes, a kind of focused intensity that made you understand this mattered to him. Really mattered. Because this wasn't just about playing a song. This was about proving he belonged in this room, in this world. That he wasn't just a pretty face who stumbled into success. That the music people kept calling a passing fad, a corruption of real American music, came from the same place as the songs these men and women had been playing their whole lives. The meeting hadn't been planned. Elvis was in Nashville recording at RCA Studio B, laying down tracks for what would become his second album. The session had run long, past midnight, and someone suggested grabbing food at a diner on Broadway. Johnny Cash happened to be there, finishing a late dinner after his own Opry performance earlier that night. They'd met before, briefly, at a radio station in Memphis. But this was different, casual. No câmeras, no anglers, no expectations. Just two young men who both happened to make music for a living, sitting in a booth eating eggs and talking. The conversation had been easy at first. Safe topics, touring schedules, the challenge of being on the road, the strangeness of sudden fame. But there was an undercurrent, an unspoken tension between their worlds. Johnny represented something traditional. Country music, the Grand Ole Opry, songs about working people and hard times and faith. His audience was rural America, folks who worked with their hands and went to church on Sunday and viewed rock and roll with deep suspicion. Elvis represented change, youth culture, a new sound that borrowed from black musicians and country singers and gospel choirs and mixed it all together into something that made the older generation uncomfortable. His audience was teenagers, kids who wanted something different from their parents' music. These worlds didn't typically overlap. But sitting there in that diner at 1 in the morning, they found common ground. Both had grown up poor. Both had learned music in church. Both understood what it meant to be hungry, not just for success but for food, for security, for a way out of the life they'd been born into. "You should come by the Opry," Johnny had said. Not quite an invitation but close. "There's usually folks backstage after the show. We jam sometimes. Pick a little. Nothing fancy." Elvis had nodded. "I'd like that." And so here they were, 3 hours later, in a dressing room that smelled like old coffee and wood polish, with a collection of Nashville's finest musicians taking a break between sets. Some of them knew Elvis's reputation. Some had dismissed him as a flash in the pan. All of them were curious. They'd been passing guitars around, playing old standards. Hank Williams songs, Carter family songs, gospel tunes that everyone knew. Elvis had hung back mostly, listening, occasionally joining in on harmonies but not pushing forward. Then someone handed him the guitar. "You know any real country songs?" someone asked. Not hostile, just testing. Elvis thought for a moment, then said the title. The room's energy shifted immediately. It was a song that required real understanding. Not just of the notes or the chords, but of what the song meant, where it came from, the tradition it represented. It was the kind of song that exposed a singer's limitations within the first verse. That's when Johnny spoke up. That's a mistake. He wasn't trying to embarrass Elvis. Johnny Cash wasn't that kind of man. He was trying to help, to steer Elvis toward something safer, something that wouldn't reveal his weaknesses in front of people who'd spent their lives mastering this craft. That song's got too much history, Johnny continued. Too many people have done it right. You do it wrong, and everyone in this room will know. Elvis nodded slowly, acknowledging the warning. I understand, he said. There's other songs, Carl Perkins offered diplomatically. Good songs that might suit your style better. But Elvis shook his head. No, he said. This is the one. The firmness in his voice surprised them. This wasn't arrogance. It was determination. The kind of determination that comes from knowing you need to prove something, not to them but to yourself. That you need to test whether you really understand this music you claim to love, or if you're just a tourist passing through. Mother Maybelle caught Johnny's eye and gave him a small nod. Let him try. Johnny sighed, but he wasn't angry, just concerned. He pushed off from the wall and found a spot on the floor, sitting cross-legged like he was settling in for a performance. All right then, he said. Show us what you got. The room went completely still. Elvis positioned the guitar, his fingers finding the chords without looking. He took a breath, closed his eyes for just a moment, and began to play. The first chord told them everything they needed to know. It wasn't the way most people played it. Elvis had found a different voicing, something lower and darker that changed the whole character of the song. Not wrong, just unexpected. Like he'd taken the traditional path and found a new route through familiar territory. His right hand moved across the strings with a rhythm that was precise but loose, that country guitar style that sounds effortless but requires years to master. The kind of playing that sits behind the beat just slightly, creating a tension and release that makes people want to move. Johnny's eyebrows went up again, but this time in surprise rather than doubt. Then Elvis started singing, and the room forgot to breathe. His voice was different from his rock and roll performances. Deeper, more resonant, with a slight catch in certain phrases that gave them weight. He wasn't trying to sound like a country singer. He was just singing the song the way it asked to be sung, with respect for its roots and confidence in his own interpretation. The first verse established his understanding. The phrasing was right, the emphasis on the correct words, the way he let certain notes ring out while cutting others short. This was someone who'd listened to the song hundreds of times, who understood its structure in his bones. But it was the second verse where he showed them something they hadn't expected. He added a vocal run, a quick cascade of notes that wasn't in the original but fit perfectly. It was a gospel technique, the kind of thing you heard in black churches in Memphis, and it transformed the song without disrespecting it. He was showing them where his music came from, the wellspring that fed everything he did. Carl Perkins leaned forward, his cigarette forgotten. Mother Maybelle's hand came up to her mouth, a gesture of surprise and recognition. She'd heard that gospel influence before, in the singing of people who'd learned music in small churches where you sang because you meant it, because it mattered. Elvis moved into the chorus with growing confidence. His voice opened up, gaining power, and you could hear the influences layering on top of each other. Country, gospel, blues, all woven together so naturally that they stopped being separate things and became just music. The technical skill was undeniable. His breath control was perfect, never gasping or forcing notes. His pitch was dead accurate, even on the difficult intervals that exposed most singers. And his timing, the way he pushed and pulled against the rhythm, showed a sophistication that came from deep listening and real study. Johnny Cash, sitting on that floor, wasn't smirking anymore. He was listening with the intensity of someone hearing something that challenged his assumptions. His head had started nodding slightly to the rhythm, unconsciously keeping time. 3 rows of coats on hooks behind him. Someone else had slipped into the room. 2 more musicians, drawn by the sound, stopping in the doorway to listen. Elvis's fingers moved to a different chord progression for the bridge, Something unexpected again, but absolutely right. He'd found a way to make an old song sound fresh without making it unrecognizable. That's the hardest trick in music, honoring tradition while bringing something new. His voice dropped to almost a whisper for the next verse, making everyone lean in. This was a performance technique, building dynamics, but it also showed confidence. Only singers who truly controlled their instrument could sing that quietly and still be heard, still have impact. The room had grown larger somehow. 8 people had become 12, then 15. Musicians from other dressing rooms, stagehands who'd heard the sound, people drawn by something they couldn't quite name but knew was special. And they all stayed quiet, respectfully, reverently quiet, because what they were hearing was the sound of genres collapsing, of walls between musical worlds coming down. This wasn't rock and roll. This wasn't traditional country. This was American music, played by someone who understood that it all came from the same source, the same need to express something too big for words alone. Elvis built toward the final chorus, his voice gaining strength, the guitar work becoming more intricate. He added a high harmony to his own melody, singing 2 parts at once in a way that shouldn't have been possible but somehow was. His vocal cords were doing things that made Mother Maybelle shake her head in amazement. The final verse was pure emotion. He wasn't showing off anymore, wasn't proving anything. He was just inside the song, living in it, letting it pour through him the way water flows through a river. His voice cracked slightly on one note, and instead of hiding it, he leaned into it, made it part of the performance. That vulnerability, that willingness to let the emotion show even when it wasn't perfect, that was the heart of country music. That was what made the great singers great. The last chord rang out, sustained, fading slowly into silence. Elvis held it until it disappeared completely, then opened his eyes. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted 5 full seconds, which felt like an hour. Elvis just sat there, guitar still in his hands, waiting for the verdict. Then Johnny Cash did something nobody expected. He started laughing. Not mockery, but pure joy. The kind of laugh that comes when something surprises you so completely that all you can do is laugh. "Well," he said, standing up and dusting off his pants, "I was wrong." The room exhaled collectively. That was... Johnny searched for words. That was the real thing, man. That was the real deal. He walked over to Elvis and stuck out his hand. Elvis shook it, relief visible on his face for the first time that night. "Where'd you learn to play like that?" Carl Perkins asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Church," Elvis said simply. "And listening. My mama used to take me to see gospel quartets when I was a kid. And there was this place on Beale Street in Memphis where the blues players would jam. They let me hang around if I stayed quiet and respectful. I listened. I tried to understand what made it work." Mother Maybelle stood up and crossed the room. She was 78 years old, had played music since before most people in that room were born, and when she spoke, people listened. "You've got the touch, son," she said to Elvis. "You understand the music. Not just how to play it, but where it comes from. That's rare." Coming from her, that statement carried weight. Mother Maybelle Carter didn't give compliments she didn't mean. The mood in the room had completely transformed. Where there had been skepticism, now there was curiosity. Where there had been distance, now there was recognition. These musicians were seeing Elvis differently, not as a threat to their world, but as someone who came from the same place they did, who'd learned from the same sources. "Play something else," someone called out. Elvis smiled and handed the guitar to Carl Perkins. "Your turn," he said. "I've taken up enough space." But Carl pushed it back. "No way. Not after that. You play whatever you want." So Elvis did. He played 3 more songs, each one showing a different side of his musical knowledge. A gospel song that had people swaying. A blues number that made even the stagehands stop working. And finally, one of his own rock and roll songs, but played acoustic and slowed down so you could hear the country and gospel foundation underneath. By the time he finished, the room had 22 people in it, packed shoulder to shoulder, all there to listen. When the impromptu concert finally ended around 4 in the morning, Johnny and Elvis sat in that dressing room alone, everyone else having drifted off to sleep or home or their own obligations. "I owe you an apology," Johnny said. "No, you don't," Elvis replied. "You were trying to help. I get it. I'm the new guy, the rock and roll guy. You had no reason to think I understood this music. But you do. You really do." Elvis looked down at his hands. "It's all the same music to me," he said quietly. "Gospel, country, blues, rock and roll. It's all just people trying to express something true. Why would I pretend some of it doesn't matter? Why would I ignore half of what made me want to sing in the first place?" Johnny nodded slowly. "Most people in your position would. Most people would stick to their lane, you know? Keep the rock and roll fans happy. Don't confuse the message." "That seems sad," Elvis said. "Like lying about who you are." That conversation, according to Johnny Cash's later accounts, went on for another hour. They talked about music, about the business, about the pressure of fame and the fear of losing yourself in all of it. They talked about their mothers, their faith, their doubts. And they formed a friendship that night that would last, complicated and distant sometimes but real, for the rest of Elvis's life. A bootleg recording surfaced in 1971, 15 years after that night. Someone had smuggled a reel-to-reel tape recorder into the Opry that night, hidden in an equipment case. The audio quality was terrible, muffled and distant, but you could hear it. Elvis singing that song, the room's stunned silence afterward, Johnny's laugh of surprise and recognition. That tape became legendary among musicians and collectors. People called it the Nashville Respect recording. It circulated for years, copies of copies, each generation adding more hiss and degradation, but people kept sharing it because it captured something important. It captured the moment when country music's establishment realized that Elvis Presley wasn't the enemy. He was family. Johnny Cash told the story many times over the years, in interviews and in his autobiography. The details stayed consistent, which is how you know a story is true. He talked about his initial skepticism, his warning to Elvis, and his complete surprise at what followed. Elvis proved something important that night, Johnny wrote in his memoir. He proved that real musicianship isn't about categories or genres. It's about understanding. It's about respect. It's about knowing where the music comes from and honoring that while bringing something of yourself to it. He continued, "I went into that night thinking Elvis was just a phenomenon, a moment in time that would pass. I came out knowing he was an artist. There's a difference." The set list from that night, the piece of paper where Elvis had written the song titles in his own handwriting, ended up framed on Johnny's wall. When people asked about it, he'd tell the story, always ending with, "That was the night I learned not to judge a book by its cover, or a musician by his hit parade." The relationship between Elvis and Johnny remained complicated over the years. They were never close in the day-to-day sense, never called each other up just to chat. Their worlds remained different, their audiences different, their paths through the music business different. But there was respect, deep, genuine respect. When Elvis was struggling in the late 60s, when his movies had become formulaic and his music had lost its edge, Johnny was one of the people who encouraged him to get back to his roots, to remember what had made him special in the first place. And when Elvis did his comeback special in 1968, returning to simple, powerful performances with just a guitar and his voice, Johnny called him afterward. "That's it," he said. "That's what I heard that night at the Opry. Don't lose that again." The story spread through Nashville, becoming part of the city's oral history. Young musicians heard it, passed it on, added it to the mythology of their craft. It became a teaching story, a parable about keeping an open mind, about respecting all forms of music, about understanding that talent and artistry don't respect the boundaries we try to draw. In 2003, the Grand Ole Opry installed a small plaque in the backstage area. It reads, "In this building, December 4th, 1956, Elvis Presley reminded us that music knows no boundaries." Witnessed by Johnny Cash, Mother Maybelle Carter, Carl Perkins, and others. The music remembers. People still visit that plaque. Musicians on their way to perform, touching it for luck. Tourists who know the story taking pictures. Young singers trying to understand what it takes to be respected in an industry that can be quick to dismiss and slow to accept. Because that's what Elvis did that night. He didn't demand respect. He didn't argue for it. He just sat down with a guitar and earned it, note by note, phrase by phrase, with a performance that proved he belonged. The lesson extends beyond music, though music is where it happened. It's about the courage to enter spaces where you're not sure you'll be welcomed. It's about doing the work to understand traditions you didn't grow up with. It's about respecting those who came before you while still bringing something of yourself to the table. Elvis could have played it safe that night, could have stuck to rock and roll, stayed in his lane, avoided the test. But he didn't. He accepted the challenge, knowing he might fail, knowing that failure would be public and embarrassing. And in accepting that risk, in being willing to be vulnerable in front of people whose opinion mattered, he transformed doubt into respect. That's harder than it sounds. Much harder. It requires confidence without arrogance, knowledge without condescension, the ability to learn from others while trusting your own voice, the willingness to be judged and the skill to meet that judgment with excellence. Most people never attempt it. They stay in their comfort zones, surround themselves with people who already accept them, avoid situations where they might be tested and found wanting. But the great ones, the ones we remember, they walk into those rooms. They pick up that guitar. They take that risk. Have you ever been in a situation where people doubted you before you even started? Where you walked into a room and felt the skepticism, the unspoken question of whether you really belonged? What did you do? Did you retreat? Or did you do what Elvis did and prove yourself through action? That's the question this story asks. Not whether you have Elvis's talent, but whether you have his courage. The courage to face doubt with confidence. The courage to risk failure in pursuit of respect. The courage to let your work speak for itself. If the story moved you, share it with someone who's facing their own moment of doubt. Someone who's about to walk into a room where they're not sure they'll be welcomed. Someone who needs to be reminded that respect is earned through excellence, not demanded through argument. Drop a comment about a time when you proved the doubters wrong. Tell me about the moment when you took the risk and it paid off. And if you want more stories about the moments that defined music's greatest artists, the nights when character and talent combined to create something unforgettable, subscribe and turn on notifications. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're lessons in courage, in artistry, in what it means to earn your place. Because somewhere right now, someone is holding a guitar, standing at a crossroads, trying to decide whether to play it safe or take the risk. And they need to know what Elvis knew that night in Nashville, that the risk is worth it, that respect earned is better than respect assumed, that sometimes the only way forward is to prove yourself, not with words but with work that speaks so clearly that doubt becomes impossible.